But when you learn how to understand your biology and your genetics, you can go back and start at the beginning where the root cause of the problems were. And that's going to allow you to more confidently move forward with success because you're following the right path that's right for you. Welcome, everybody, to the podcast. This is Dr. Brad Kobsar. Welcome to this episode. We are going to be talking today on neurotransmitters. We're going to go back a little bit more on a little more brain health and DNA. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So neurotransmitters, these are the hormones of the brain. All right. So they're not actually hormones, but they act like hormones. The only difference is that hormones go throughout the body. And neurotransmitters, they go throughout the body to deliver messages. And neurotransmitters are basically more restricted to the brain. They're not totally restricted to the brain. There's actually neurotransmitters in your gut as well. Serotonin, I think it's between 80 and 90% of your serotonin is produced in your gut. So that's a very powerful neurotransmitter. And we're going to talk more about that. But just a little more background information on neurotransmitters. They interact, and there's crosstalk between the neurotransmitters to all regions of the brain to basically deliver messages, much like a hormone, like I said earlier. But they're not, but they function in the same way. They're messenger molecules in your brain, in your nervous systems that combine to function. Okay, even if your diet is great and you exercise a lot, your health can still suffer if your neurotransmitters are out of balance. So some of the more commonly known neurotransmitters, just from examples for you guys: serotonin, that's really important for sleep, memory, and moods. Dopamine, so a lot of people are familiar with, is important for learning, focus, your drive. Glutamate for memory. Adrenaline, we all know that's our fight or flight hormone. Histamine is important for metabolism, temperature, and sleep. And then acetylcholine, ACH, is important for muscle action. So neurotransmitters can get out of balance, just like our hormones can get out of balance. So some of the problems that we see specifically with serotonin when it gets out of balance, we see depression, we see PMS, cravings, sweet cravings, food cravings, and autism can all result. Dopamine, that can lead to tremors, Parkinson's, ADHD, and addiction is one of the big issues concerning dopamine. Glutamate is important in your memory and in Alzheimer's progression. Adrenaline in allergies and inflammation. Histamine, depression, ADHD, sleep and anxiety. And then acetylcholine is when it gets out of balance, it can result in migraine, seizures, and autism. Okay, so what causes them to get out of balance? What are some neurotransmitter disruptors? Okay, I'm going to talk about the most heavily influenced one of all. The one that is affecting us the most is something called glyphosate. Glyphosate is the ingredient in Roundup. Okay, that's the pesticide that is being sprayed all over our crops to kill insects, basically. But they also affect our nervous system. Okay, they attack the nervous system of insects. That's how the glyphosate works. But it also affects our immune system, and that can result in, or not our immune system, our nervous system. And it'll result in an exhausted sympathetic nervous system. Okay, so that's glyphosate. Fluoride is another one, right? In our water and toothpaste. So it lowers your IQ, affects your learning and memory, can cause damage to a fetus that's still in development, and will alter behaviors. Artificial sweeteners, another very common neurotransmitter disruptor. Several symptoms include anxiety attacks, slurred speech, depression, and migraines. Heavy metals, that's the mercury, lead, cadmium. So those are some of the more common ones. and they lead to autism, Alzheimer's, MS, multiple sclerosis, Parkinson's, and so on and so forth. And then the last one is monosodium glutamate. Everybody knows this one from, it's in a lot of Chinese food restaurants, especially. And it leads to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and dementia. Okay, so those are some of the specific, top 5 basically neurotransmitters disruptors. So again, they're glyphosate, they're fluoride, artificial sweeteners, heavy metals, and monosodium glutamate. So I want to talk now a little bit about SNPs. SNPs are, what that stands for is, a lot of people use the word SNPs just as an abbreviation. When we're talking about DNA and genetics, SNP stands for single nucleotide polymorphisms. Okay, so that's a $100 word, right? It is the most common genetic variation that we see when it comes to our DNA. We have 5 million of them, 5 million SNPs. And this variation in our SNPs is what changes our genetics and our susceptibilities to different diseases, food sensitivities, how our muscles respond to exercise, what kind of macronutrients are right for us. Things that we've been talking about all through this whole series. The SNPs are an important, that they're the reasons, they're the things that gives us the variation. An example would be the APOE gene, which manifests for many people as Alzheimer's. Okay, that's the important SNP, it's SNP for Alzheimer's. So micronutrients are important for the production of neurotransmitters, and the neurotransmitters now drive our metabolic systems. So our micronutrients, that's our vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, probiotics, omega-3 fish oils, all of those micronutrients that we've been talking about over the series, they alter different ratios of groups. I don't want to go into organic chemistry here, but that's going to affect our production of dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, melatonin, norepinephrine. Okay, there's vitamin B3, vitamin C, vitamin D. Those are all directly involved in the production of serotonin. So if you have a deficiency in any of those, that's going to affect your happiness. Okay, because that's what serotonin is really important for, is a mood stabilizer. Vitamin B3, vitamin C, vitamin D are all important in the production of dopamine. Okay, so that's our hormone or our neurotransmitter that's really important for motivation, and among other things. Vitamin C, vitamin B3, vitamin B2, all important for the production of norepinephrine and epinephrine. That's our fight or flight neurotransmitter. So we need to have those micronutrients in order for our body to produce those. So there's a test that we do in our DNA testing that is called testing for methylation. And some of you may be familiar with this term. It's called the MTHFR defect, or it's more of, I don't like to use the word defect. I like the word variant better, or genetic variant. And it's just something that 50% of the population has. Okay. So when it comes to DNA testing, everybody's got a DNA test now, right? You can walk in a Target now or some other department store and get a DNA test. But the first thing I always ask a person who's considering that is, how comfortable are you with putting your DNA into the hands of Target? Okay, nothing against Target. It's just that these guys, this is not a recognized medical entity or facility, right? They're not going to be set up to make sure that your information is kept confidential. Okay, so there's no guarantee of confidentiality. They don't even talk about it, right? It's not even a discussion. Let alone some of the different ones on TV, right? We see the different ones that show up on TV as well. And I mean, one of the reasons I did not do DNA testing for years and years is because of that confidentiality. I don't want my information out there. I certainly don't want put my patients or our wellness partners at that same kind of risk. So making sure that, when you get a DNA test, you want to go to a recognized medical facility where they have HIPAA compliance, those laws that promise and guarantee that your information is going to stay confidential. Just like when you get a blood test done or an MRI or an X-ray, all of that is going to be confidential, and any kind of medical records, right? Even a doctor's visit. So our DNA test we use has 32 SNPs, those SNPs that we were just talking about. So that's one of the main reasons I did choose this particular DNA test. So some of you are familiar with the 23andMe. It's called that because it has 23 SNPs. The more SNPs tested, obviously, the more information we have, the more that we can discover, what are the right choices for you, so that you're making the right choices for your body type and your genetic blueprint. Okay. HIPAA compliant, like I mentioned, and then also the placebo versus the nocebo effect. We talked about that quite extensively in past episodes. And that's just the power of the brain, right? When you start putting your focus on and attention on a certain outcome, there's so much power in how you think and focus your thoughts, that it can substantially affect the outcome of any kind of treatment. So much so that in scientific studies, any type of treatment that's being tested or studied has to show that the benefits are going to be above 33% when you look at it statistically in its significance. Anything 33% or below can be attributed to the placebo effect. Okay, so 33% of people basically are told that they get a certain type of treatment and it's going to have a certain kind of outcome, and just their thoughts alone make that happen. Okay, so that's a powerful thing. The other thing is that with the DNA test, you want to have something that looks at your lifestyle as well. Okay, because your DNA does not know what your lifestyle is. If you're just looking at DNA, a DNA test is not going to include information like what's your diet like? Okay, how do you exercise? What kind of stress are you under? What kind of environment do you live in? What season is it? All of these things are going to play important parts of decisions that you make to set up a plan that's going to achieve optimal health for you. So a DNA test alone is not that powerful, but when you combine it with lifestyle and a lifestyle assessment, now you really have something. Okay. So I want to go back, and I want to just coming back now to neurotransmitters, just the two very important neurotransmitters that are used. They can be used for you and they can be used against you very easily. Dopamine and serotonin. So dopamine is that pleasure neurotransmitter. It's our reward neurotransmitter. So it's something that we look forward to. We get a hit of dopamine in certain things that make us feel good. It's that feel good, but it's also short-lived, and too much leads to addiction. Okay. Serotonin is a happiness neurotransmitter, and too little leads to depression. Okay. So I just want to just clarify the difference between pleasure, happiness, and joy. Okay. So because in marketing, when you watch marketing on television and different, internet programs, they will use pleasure as if it's going to make you happy. So I want to really distinguish between these three: pleasure, happiness, and joy. So pleasure is something that's external, right? Happiness and joy is internal. Okay. Nothing outside of you is going to make you happy. It has to come from within. Pleasure is short-lived, feel good, want more. Happiness is long-lived. Okay. It's more permanent. Pleasure is typically taking something, and happiness is more giving. Pleasure is always going to lead to addiction. Okay, the end point of all pleasure is addiction. I don't care if it's alcohol, sugar, sex, nicotine, social media, video games, shopping, you know, gambling, all of these things, all pleasure, all addiction. Happiness, you're going to be content. You don't feel that, you don't need that ongoing, you don't need another hit. Okay, and here's why. Dopamine affects your brain. It causes your brain cells to actually die. Dopamine kills they're called neurons. That's the name of the brain cells. And they have a survival mechanism called desensitization. Okay, so that when the next time you get your dopamine hit, you don't get as much of a response. It's now toned down. So the first time you get a hit, you get a rush. So whether it's, like I said, shopping, sugar, alcohol, whatever it is, you get that dopamine hit, you get a rush. Next time, now you need to have a bigger hit to get that same rush. Okay, then a bigger hit and a bigger hit, and finally a huge hit and gets nothing. That's when brain cells die. That's when the neurons die, and that's called addiction. So I have a picture here of an MRI of 4 different brains. One's a normal brain, and then the other 3 are brains that have addictive, are brains of an addictive person. One's with sugar, one is with cocaine, and one is with alcohol. And it shows all the dopamine centers of their brain are shot. They've been burned out, so they can't produce dopamine anymore. So that they can't find that pleasure, and that they become this constant pursuit to try to get that feeling back. Cravings and dopamine. Cravings are a chemical reaction in the brain. Dopamine is the reward-based neurotransmitter that drives the need for that craving. Okay, so food cravings come from the area of the brain called the hippocampus that deals with memory, pleasure, and reward. One of the many reasons people indulge in cravings is for that feel-good sensation that they get from their hit of dopamine. Okay, and it lasts for usually about 10 minutes, and that typically is followed by guilt. Okay, and that can now start this addictive cycle that I'll talk more about. But speaking from experience, this is an awful cycle. I think we've all had some kind of experience of this at some point. Just choose your poison, choose your addiction, whatever it is. We've all had it at some level. For some people, it's more crushing and affecting our lives than others. I mean, some addictions are not as devastating to our lives than others, but we've all, for the most part, I mean, even exercise, marathon runners, that runner's high, they get that is part of, and it can become an addiction. So how do we stop this from constantly happening? Well, you want to make sure your body is right from the inside out. And the key is to get your cravings under control. And it's something that everybody, like I said, struggles with at one time or another, including myself. And it can be a complicated process, right? It can be complicated to figure out. But thanks to my DNA report, it gives me the tools I need in order to have success. I struggled with intense cravings for years. It was awful. It becomes mentally draining, and it can beat you up. And a lot of the beating up actually comes from yourself for giving into them, right? Okay, now I want to talk a little bit more about something happier, and that is serotonin. Serotonin is the happy neurotransmitter. Okay, it's responsible for mood, attention, sleep, and pain, and it plays a vital role in that feel-good factor. It affects your ability to stick with your diet, and here's why. Research shows that approximately 2 weeks into a diet, people become moody, they struggle with sleep, and they can't focus. They lose their focus. Any of that sound familiar? Okay, so why does that happen? Well, it's because the diet does not align with the macronutrients in their DNA. And when that happens, their serotonin levels crash. And when they crash, they get frustrated, they get depressed, and then they quit. Okay. Females are hit hardest here because serotonin and tryptophan, which is a building block of serotonin, It's an amino acid. It takes a harder hit when dieting than it does in males. Okay, so this can be a potential explanation why eating orders are more prevalent in females than in males. Okay, they take a harder hit on their serotonin levels when they diet. If your diet is feeding depression, now your body's going to crave foods that promote production of serotonin. Okay, guess what food promotes serotonin? Carbs, right? You crave more salty, sweet snacks, and this can make it much more easier for you and so many of us to fall into the yo-yo effects of dieting. Okay, that's a lot of that up and down, up and down. So consuming too many refined carbohydrates and sugars now we're stimulating our pleasure centers, right? We're bringing our serotonin levels back in, but now we're stimulating our dopamine. And now that's going to downregulate serotonin, since dopamine and serotonin are actually inversely related. So like almost all hormones of the body, neurotransmitters are the same. There's always a counterbalance. Okay, so insulin's counterbalance is glucagon. Testosterone's counterbalance is estrogen. There's always a balance. That's what we're talking about when we're always talking about balancing hormones. It's the same thing with neurotransmitters. We have to have that right balance. So now that you're trying to get your dopamine levels back up by eating the carbs, but now that stimulates your pleasure centers. And so now your dopamines fire up. And when your dopamine goes up, now your serotonin goes down. So actually, the more pleasure you get, the less happy you become. Okay. It's actually driving away your happiness by pursuing pleasure. So this means the more dopamine you produce, the more serotonin is shut down, because it now lowers that serotonin sensitivity in the brain. Now comes the drowsiness, the inflammation, the diabetes, the overweight, the obesity, all those fun things, right, that we're all just excited about. And micronutrients have an immense impact also on serotonin levels. As we talked about earlier, vitamin B3, thiamine, it can significantly elevate your mood and your overall well-being by stimulating and feeding that production of serotonin. Now, an interesting personal fact about myself, after I took my DNA test, I found I was completely unable to process vitamin B12 and vitamin B3, which we were just talking about. In addition, I was compromised with vitamin B6, which is also essential to the production of serotonin and has actually been shown to be very effective in treating depression. And so for me, it didn't matter if I was getting my B vitamins or not. My body lacked the enzyme to process it. I had that MTHFR on my SNP I was talking about earlier, on my SNP, that genetic variation. So once I learned that, now I started taking B vitamins that were made personally for me based on my DNA test, so that the stuff that I couldn't do in my body, the lab was now doing for me. So now when those B vitamins came to me, my body could use it. Okay, the enzyme was that step that the enzyme does, which is called methylation, was already done for me. So once I started taking these, I can now assimilate my B vitamins and process them. And dieting then becomes much easier, okay? Even for people who have struggled for years, they were able to turn this switch on that they weren't able to switch on before, and that's going to allow you to follow through easier. Make no mistake, dieting and following a healthy lifestyle is harder for some than it is for others. No doubt about it, right? But when you learn how to understand your biology and your genetics, you can go back and start at the beginning where the root cause of the problems were, and that's going to allow you to more confidently move forward with success because you're following the right path that's right for you. Okay. Let's talk now a little bit about motivation. Neurotransmitters play a critical part in motivation. It's crazy how much your genetics play a role in not just your diet, which is your macronutrients, but also your micronutrients. And not only that, but also in terms of what is the best exercise for you so that you're motivated to work out. When it comes down to motivation, there's two factors linked to your DNA that predetermine if you are intrinsically motivated or extrinsically motivated. Okay. Intrinsic motivation is when your behavior is driven by your satisfaction and your enjoyment. Okay. It comes from within. Extrinsic motivation just sounds like what it sounds like. It's external, internal versus external. Extrinsic motivation is when behavior is driven by external recognition, money or encouragement, right? All of those things that come from outside of us. So genetically speaking, there are reasons for your motivations to achieve. It's built into you. Some like how it makes them feel, and that feeling drives them to show up and consistently get things done. Those are the intrinsic people. Others are motivated by running in maybe a 5K race. Okay, they want to have that competition. That drives them more so they can succeed and feel good. That is what brings them their pleasure. Maybe having a workout partner, somebody that they can work out with, fitting into how they fit into their clothes, or some other kind of athletic achievement. These are all the more extrinsically motivated people. So yes, your likelihood for one or the other can be somewhat in the middle as well, or a combination of both. And that can be tested through a test that we do called the BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is linked to motivation. That's a gene. And honestly, I think most of us probably already have a pretty good idea of what motivates us, right? We know pretty well what is our why, basically. Okay, personally, I'm on the intrinsic side of things, but it never hurts to have extrinsic goals as well, right? Such as for me, one of the things that motivates me is my metabolic age. I like testing my metabolic age every 4 to 6 weeks, and my goal is to have it in my 20s. Okay, I'm 56, but my metabolic age right now it's right at 30. It's been stuck at 30 for like, I think 3 months. I can't break the 30s to get back in, but that's an extrinsic motivation for me. Another one would be a fitness competition, maybe going on vacation, the beach body, bathing suit stuff, or supercharging my cells. Okay. Oh, that's that's more of the nerd in me that would be motivated by that, but it's still an external test where I'm looking at my achievement. Overall, I am intrinsically motivated because, goal or not, I'm still going to go work out. Okay. It helps my mindset. I like how it feels. It sets a tone for me to have an awesome day. And this is valuable information for me to know when I'm making out my plan, my plan to help set myself up to succeed. The success rate for people accomplishing their health and wellness goals is roughly 30%. And that's a sad reality, but that's one of the many reasons why DNA testing can be so valuable, is especially if you're in if you're in a just getting started phase, or if you're just really unsure about these things. It's really going to help shed some light on ways to set yourself up to succeed. The level of success, both on a personal level and with my patients, our wellness partners, is far easier when you understand, or when I understand, how your body works, what motivates you, why you lack energy, why you have cravings. All of these things can really change the whole game and help you in recreating your health. Now, what do all mood swings, depression, and fatigue, what do these things have in common? Let's talk a little bit about vitamin B6, pyridoxine, okay, for a second. Because it is a critical building block for the production of serotonin, okay, the happy neurotransmitter, and epinephrine. That's that fight or flight neurotransmitter. If you don't have vitamin B6, your body can't make them. And they're massive influencers on your moods, okay? And serotonin is also the precursor to melatonin, which is the neurotransmitter important for sleep. Melatonin helps us fall asleep, stay asleep, and get a good quality sleep. It also commands your body rhythms and your body clock. Now, vitamin B6, along with the other B vitamins, deals with the process of converting food into fuel, i.e. energy. So if you can't convert food into fuel, what happens? You experience fatigue. Some get it more than others. And when food isn't converted into fuel, guess where it goes? It gets stored as fat, right? And so when it comes to this process, you can't really have one without the other. Okay. Do you ever get a B12 shot? Okay. That's become sort of a common thing, at least in the area that I am. And people come in and they tell me that they've had B12 shots, and they don't really feel that energy that people talk about. They don't notice anything. And I always tell them, well, if you're deficient in B6 or B3 and you get a B12 shot, it really isn't going to have an effect. Not only that, but if your body can't process B12, it's not going to have an effect either. Okay, because you lack that enzyme to convert it, to use it. B6, along with all other vitamins, like I said, converts food into fuel. So it's not going to have the same effect on one person, as it is on another. Okay, that's how different we all are. Now, how does this affect our outcomes for our health and wellness goals? Well, you can obviously see how just this one thing can have a huge impact. It impacts your energy. It impacts your motivation. So who wants to work out when they're tired and depressed, right? Personally, I haven't found anyone yet, right? They drag themselves to get there. Just getting there is like a victory in itself. And then once they're there, they go through the motions. So you got to have energy, and you got to have a good outlook on life. Okay. If you're depressed, man, it's hard. It's nearly impossible, I would say. Fatigue causes our leptin. So we talked about leptin in a couple of episodes ago and how it's the hunger hormone. And fatigue causes our leptin levels to go down. So now you get the added pleasure of hunger cravings and the urge to snack more often. So if you want to win in your health and in your life, you need to set yourself right on the inside out. Okay. So now it's going to translate. We ask our bodies to give a lot, but we have to pay attention to what it needs. So I want to talk about some specific exercises that you can do for brain health. And this was really fun. This was in one of the research papers I did earlier this year. So these are 4 different types of exercise that really stimulate different brain centers. The first one is weightlifting. Okay. It stimulates the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is important for complex thinking, reasoning, and problem solving. And I always think this one is so funny because when we think of bodybuilders, the weightlifters, it's always this, kind of big, muscular, not very intelligent person, right? I pick things up, I put things down, right? So it actually, though, does stimulate those more executive functions of the brain involved in problem solving and reasoning and et cetera and so forth. Okay. That's the first one. The second type is burst training. So burst training is kind of like that high intensity interval training. So where you're doing short bursts of energy, then maybe rest, or maybe not completely rest, but you slow down. So that stimulates the hypothalamus of the brain. And that's important for controlling cravings, addictions, and appetite. All right. So if you have a lot of strong cravings, go do some burpees or some jumping jacks. Okay. That's going to help, as opposed to the long distance endurance training, which actually has the opposite effect. Sports drills. This is the third type of exercise now. When you do sports drills, that stimulates your prefrontal cortex. Okay. So by sports drills, I'm talking about like if you're a tennis player, you're going through, you're practicing your ground strokes, your volleys, your serve, different drills, hockey, basketball, whatever the sport is, the different drills that you do in practice stimulate your prefrontal cortex. And that's going to help you in everyday life, but with multitasking, as well as focus and attention. Okay. So those are all really good for that. Sports drills. Fourth type of exercise is prayer, meditation. Okay. That's going to stimulate the frontal lobe of the brain and where our thoughts are and emotions are. So that's kind of more the more traditional this one is probably the least surprising to all of you, because the more traditional meditative, slower kind of exercises, yeah, that's going to help with your thoughts and emotions and slowing things down, right? And hopefully thinking good thoughts, putting it into a good place. I don't really like I have a real hard time with the meditation where you're just supposed to empty your brain. I can't do that. I'm sorry. I got to have something going on in my brain. So I like to use my meditation time as intentional. Okay. It's like, if I'm going to be in a meditative state, I want to meditate on something that maybe I want to see happen in my life. Maybe it's in my physical health. Maybe it's in my family, something happening with my finances. Maybe it's happening with just, it could be anything, right? You name it. But something, the whole, what is that? Law of attraction, right? So what you focus on is what you're going to get, right? That's what happens in life, right? So you can make a mountain out of a molehill, right? And you can do that in a good way, or you can do it in a bad way. So, but you get to decide. It's your thoughts. You get to make the conscious choice. Do I want to dwell here? Is this where I want to focus my thoughts? If it's a negative thought, probably not a good idea, right? We don't want to make a mountain out of negative things. We want to make a mountain of the positive things. So that meditation time becomes a time for me to think about, what do I want to see happen in my life in the next 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, right? So now that becomes more like meditation's got so many different connotations around it. But meditation is prayer. It's prayer time, but it's just how you do it. It's basically, one way is doing it where you have no intention, and then, in terms of your thoughts. And the other way is having a specific intention that you want to meditate on. For me, that's the way I want to go. So anyways, that's just a personal preference. So those are the 4 exercises. And there was something else I wanted to say. Oh, yes, on the long distance running exercises. So that when you do long distance running, it's kind of like a meditation. For me, it was. I used to do a lot of running in college. I was up to 35, 40 miles a week. And I always had things come to me when I was running. I always had, it helps with memory. And so it got to the point where I had to take a pen with me on my runs, because I'd have a list of like 5 things by the time I got back on my run. And so it just was really cool to see this in a study that, the long distance running stimulates that memory. So anyways, that's all I've got for today, you guys.